All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another
Hello.
episode of Excess Succeed. Hi, Rose. Rose is here with me.
Hello.
Rose is here today to talk about Goldlewis. Maybe the coolest looking man alive. I wish that I could look that cool. I feel like pompadour, Air Force jacket, uh, big beard, glasses with one lens is something we should all aspire to. Uh,
Absolutely. And the giant coffin on the back.
Oh yeah, with something in it. Really cool character, really cool Exceed character. Really excited to have Rose's perspective on this guy on the call. He's a very complicated character. He's a very flexible character. And also he looks cool. So thrilled to have Rose's expertise on here to teach me about him. This is a show where I, Gearface, a absolute Exceed newbie, uh, steal the time and expertise of someone much better at the game than me, in this case, Rose, to teach me a character. Couple disclaimers before we get started. As always, number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on the show. That's not the only way to play. Exceeds fun. Play it for fun. You'll play longer. You'll have more fun doing it. You'll learn more when you're having fun. If you want to get good, play for fun. If the way that we're describing how to play Goldlewis is not fun to you, don't play that way and play the way that you want to play instead. Number two, we are going to be talking in pretty prescriptive terms on this show about strategy. Um, you might hear Rose say things like, this is always a boost, or this is never, always spend this as force. This is all, like, never do this, always do that. Things like that. Take all those things with a grain of salt. Not only I'm not an expert at all. Rose is an expert, but even her opinion is just her very informed opinion. But also, Goldlewis is a very flexible character, and there's a lot of ways to play him. So these are the rules of Rose's strategy for Goldlewis, the way that she sees him. So other ways to play him are definitely not wrong, and they have strengths and weaknesses over what Rose is going to describe. But this is what has worked well for Rose, and she's comfortable enough with it to be able to explain it. Rose, you think that's fair?
Yep, that's fair. And
All
that's
right.
a good call because, as we talked about, there are other ways to play Gold Lewis that I will probably not be getting very in depth on because I'll let maybe future guide makers talk about.
Future Exceed scholars will still have
Yes.
research to do on Goldlewis. Okay, cool. Um, yeah, so if we get anything wrong or if we underrepresent something, it is possible that you were playing a different line of play with Goldlewis, and tell us about it because I want to know more about the flexible things that he can do. But yeah, with all that said, Rose, tell me about Goldlewis.
All right. So I spent a while thinking about where do we start with Gold Lewis because on one hand, he's a pretty simple character. Like he has all these really relatively simple effects. Here's an altar that just closes 8. It just has stats and it hit closes 8.
Right.
And a lot of his cards individually are pretty simple if you look at them. Um, like this just is a mid speed. This just is a slow. Um, this just says you start the game with 2 more cards. There's nothing else
Right.
here.
There isn't something like I'm not looking at like 9 or Polar Night and trying to read 4 different paragraphs of text spread
Yes,
across 4 different
exactly.
cards. To like he's a very legible character.
Yep. And I think that's because in other ways he's a really complicated character and there's like a complexity budget to an Exceed character
Sure, you
where
not everything can be complicated.
that would be really funny, a Gold Lewis type character with like Polar Knight, Plague Knight 9 cards.
Oh God.
But yes, that's Gold Lewis because we'll start. I decided eventually, let's start by looking at, of course, the character card.
Mhm.
And in this case, the deck composition, because Gold Lewis has a kind of interesting deck composition compared to the average Exceed character with a 30 card 2 of deck.
Right.
Gold Lewis starts with extra cards in his hand. His maximum hand size is increased. And he has a 36 card deck with 2 of 18 different cards instead of 2 of 15 different.
15. And I noticed as I was laying these out, normally I've got Goldlewis here and all of his specials and ultras laid out here, and I was like, wait a minute, there's not enough room. He's got too much stuff in his briefcase, so we had to make do with this configuration because he has so many cards. But he does have 2 of every one of these, correct? He doesn't have, like, 3 of
Yes.
one or
Yep.
something, some other characters do.
Yep. They're all two ofs, which I think compared to if you had 36 cards, but they were just 5 types of cards, whatever, that would be not too different from a normal Exceed character. The fact that they're all two ofs
Right,
means there's more to think about.
right.
Um, so, um, where to start here? I feel like oh yes, and yeah, as you said in the intro, the other thing that's kind of interesting, I am probably never going to say about any of these cards, this is always a boost, this is always an attack. They are generally do a pretty good job of having similar values on the attack side and the boost side, so there is almost always a decision on that as well.
Right.
So yeah, back to the man himself, Goldlewis. Um, you sort of don't have a front side ability. The maximum hand size does matter. Um, but other than the maximum hand size, you just draw more cards. Um, Notably, it's before Mulligan. So in Exceed, we already have a really generous Mulligan. We have an even more generous Mulligan than the average Exceed character. We get to look at 7 or 8 cards before we pick what to shuffle back in.
Right.
And so that gives us a lot of control over the starting hand. I meant to go to a like hypergeometric calculator and run some numbers here, but I will say that's like the very first important decision you're making in a Goldlewis game is the mulligan. We talked about in other guides like Dan, like, oh, you can mulligan away the stuff you want to wild swing, etc. In Goldlewis,
Right.
it's a lot more complicated. You need to mulligan based on what you think you're going to need in that matchup. And because the hand size is so big, for other characters, you might mulligan with like, here's what I'm going to do the first 3 turns, but can you do that for like the first 5 or 6 turns? Like things will get out of your plan by then.
Right. Hence the calculator, right? Like the number of routes you have through a 9-card hand are exponentially greater than the number of routes you have through a 7-card hand.
Yep. I was working on the app and Goldlewis was slowing down the tests because he was having to consider which of like 16 cards to spend for force.
Right.
Um,
Oh,
okay.
and that kind of coming back to what you were saying about like the shape of his kit. When you're mulliganing something, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're mulliganing something, you are bringing in cards that you think you will need, pitching them for later if you don't think you need them. But because he has a larger deck than most characters, you might not see those cards that you're mulliganing away for much longer.
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk in more detail about why the larger decks, how I think larger deck size impacts Exceed, but that is something that's definitely true of any card game, basically. If your deck is larger, and in whatever unlucky case, the thing you need could be at the very bottom of it.
Right. And you don't have
Um,
more than the normal number of copies of any card in your deck, including your normals. So if you pitch them, you are less likely to see any given card again until
yes.
later in the game.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So we kind of already started talking about this, but more formally, like, what do you do with a larger starting hand size? You can choose to do some aggression, like a lot of people like prepping turn 1. There's arguments about whether that's good or not. You don't need to. You just have 7 cards, and you can start immediately playing attacks.
Right.
You could also look for EXs, because EXs are strong in this game. Everyone knows, like, Jazz Hand, or not everyone, but a lot of people know about the meme Jazz Hands. You have EX Dive turn 1, your opponent does anything, you respawn with EX Dive, you win the strike.
Right.
Um, but I'm actually going to say we're not going to really go for either of those. We will use EXs sometimes, like they're a powerful mechanic of the system. You certainly want to not just completely ignore them. But I think this kit is most suited for a kind of toolbox style where you have a lot of different options and you keep options live and you have some recursion in your ultra boosts. Both of these let you return specials from your discard pile.
Mhm.
So you can kind of look for the cards that you'll need at the situations you'll need them. If you mess up a little bit, you can get them back. or if there's just something that's so good you don't have to mess up, you just want to play it like 5 times, you can do that as well. So why am I going to say we should play it this way as opposed to the other ones? That goes back to what we were talking about having all these different options in the deck. And in this game, deck pressure is real. There's again a lot of discussion about how much it matters. Like you can certainly play Exceed in a style where the game is over before anyone's drawn too many cards, or you can play until deck out on the second run through the deck.
Right.
Depends on the player, depends on the character, depends on what strategies they choose to go for in that game. But I'll say in every game, almost every game, it matters at least a little.
Right. And Rose, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm a fighting game dork, not a card game dork. Deck pressure refers to you can lose in this game by decking out, by running out of cards to draw, or wild swinging with an empty deck or something like that. When you cannot draw a card anymore, if you have more cards left in deck than your opponent, they are closer to that loss condition than you are. So
That's part of it. That's
can
not 100% of it, but that
okay.
is, yeah.
Okay.
The other part of it is just the way the game Exceed works, right? You're playing mix-ups. Have these limited options that you have to.
Oh, I see. So if I have 5 cards left in deck and you have 10 cards left in deck, you can represent more options, and it is less likely that you are completely out of a specific thing. Is it that kind of thing?
Exactly. Yep.
I can't know for sure that this spike is totally safe right here because
Because I still have an assault or a slash in this case.
You haven't dropped both slashes. You've dropped one, but you've maintained the other, and you have enough cards that it could still be in there.
Yep. That matters. Reading matters, and then of course, like you were saying, the more extreme, like you're just completely out of cards and you actually lose the game as a result.
Okay.
Matters.
Okay.
So, as a character that doesn't have reading, it's a little interesting how your deck pressure matches up to someone with a standard deck size but does have reading. You'll be vulnerable to reading, but you will have the advantage in terms of options left and the extreme. You can just draw more cards before the game ends.
Right.
So that's something that's a real benefit to this larger deck size. And then by playing in this kind of more controlled way, where we're not just dropping EX cards, where we're keeping options alive, we can increase that effect. If we play both of our EX sweeps right away, our EX sweep right away, then we just are out of sweeps. We can't recur normals. That'll be kind of a recurring theme.
Okay.
So that is part of why I'm saying EXs are not the style we're going to go for, is they directly conflict with this style. You have to, at some level, make a choice between, am I going to play lots of EXs or am I going to keep options alive?
Right. And he's a character. I assume part of the reason that you are talking about EXs as a possible line of play of his, he has a large hand size. It allows him to have more cards in hand at the same time. We'll get to it in a second. He draws a lot of cards.
Yep.
And he could easily cultivate in the same way that somebody like Guile can. He could cultivate a hand full of EX options and just win combat overwhelmingly with the power of those EXs. There are EX characters in Exceed who are kind of specialized in doing this, and Goldlewis has like
some of those traits.
Yeah,
that's another thing.
He's like half of what they're doing because of his hand size and his deck composition. But you're saying that it is more valuable to maintain those options than to crush somebody with an EX attack in the way that you're playing.
By and large, obviously, tactically, like if an EX wins you a strike really well, you should go for it.
Sure,
but you're not planning around EXs.
We're not gunning for EXs as our main strategy.
Yep, and part of that is the shape of the kit. We'll get back into this when we look at the cards, but there aren't that many of these cards that benefit heavily from being EX. That's another thing that EX characters have going on, which is that
somebody like Waldstein, who's all of his cards are like fair, and then when you EX them, they get like dumb.
Yep, exactly.
Goldlewis, his exact attack shapes don't really have that property.
Some of them, but not many. Yep.
Okay.
And even for some of them, you are making that real trade-off of, well, now I am not representing this, at least until I recur it for the specials.
Right, right.
Okay. So the other reason I'm going to say that we want to play Toolboxy is that we have a lot of cards, and they have a pretty good variety of things that they do, but they have some common weaknesses, and so we'll want to have the right cards available to cover the weakness that the opponent knows about. So we can't waste those cards.
Right.
And then we'll want to have the right card for the niche we need at the moment, so we can't waste those cards either.
So we're just those two considerations alone are pretty strong, a pretty strong way to advocate not to use EXs frivolously. Like
Yeah,
we
notably, that's true for a lot of characters. Like, right, a lot of characters you don't want to. It's not, as I'm saying, keep repeating because I'm wishy-washy. You use EXs when they are good,
right,
but we're not.
right.
We're not an all-in EX character.
That makes sense.
Yep. So of those weaknesses, we can cover some of them with our boosts. And we have more boosts than other characters, which is also cool because boosting is a really strong thing in this game, surprisingly.
Yeah, right.
Boosts half the game. Pretty worth doing.
Who would have thought?
Yep. So then, as I said, talk about deck size a little. Is this larger deck a strength or a weakness? If you're coming from another card game, you will. It is very easy to just assume it's a weakness because in a lot of card games it is. In Magic Draft, for instance, you always play the very minimum deck size you're allowed to.
Right.
And that's sort of been like a golden rule of card games. You need a really good reason to break it. But Exceed is different from those card games in ways that I think matter. There definitely is a mixed bag. It's not a pure strength to have a larger deck in Exceed. But a lot of the considerations from other card games don't fully apply.
Is that
in Magic Draft?
Is that because like we are playing like simultaneous reveal the way that Exceed is, like we're playing mix-ups, right?
Yeah, that's at least part of it for sure. We need to keep our mix-ups live. That we kind of touched on this with the deck pressure.
Right.
It's a real advantage for Goldlewis that the opponent has to consider more options anytime they want to do anything.
So in something like Magic the Gathering, you sometimes hear things like it's a very lean deck or a really fast deck. It draws through its options quickly to get to its win condition cards or whatever. Like
really strong Magic decks often do have a lot of draw power, and you draw your good cards, you play your good cards, and you win. But that's not really how Exceed works.
Exceed, your cards can be good and your cards can be overwhelming, but one way they can be good is if you can fake your opponent out with what you're playing.
Yep.
And being able to do that is contingent on other cards still being in your deck. So if you use all of them up to get to the good stuff, well, those good things can still be played around. For most characters, at least. Okay.
And then we we've been touching on this a little bit, and we haven't really examined this assumption that the difference in card value in Exceed, there are certainly some cards in your deck that are better than others. I'll argue it's lower than these other card games by a fair bit. Like in Magic, your best card in your draft deck might be like, if I play this card and you don't have an answer, I win. Full stop.
Right.
And the worst card in your draft deck might just be like, I put this here because I need to, if I don't play a card on my turn, I'm sad.
Yeah, you're behind.
Whereas in Exceed, you'll have, like, this is a really threatening mix-up option, this is a more niche mix-up option.
Right.
But they both,
sometimes you want both, and yes. Both options have a use case, and sometimes you will be sad to not have one.
Yep.
Okay.
You see people in other card games talking about like drawing till they're outs, and that does happen in Exceed. That's where we'll get back into like this is a drawback. You might not have your out, but outs are a lot less universal in this game. It's a lot more like I need a slow because I think they're playing a fast. Then
Right.
I need a board wipe because if I don't have a board wipe, I lose the game.
I die. Right. Okay. So because of the nature of mix-ups and exceed, there it's not a universal strength because sometimes you just don't have the thing that you need. But
Yep.
because there's an amount of ambiguity to the cards you're playing, even as you're playing them, you can't just rely on a fast deck being a better deck the way you could in other card games. Is that fair to summarize?
That is, and also we're just getting a lot of points here. Unfortunately, so I'm sorry.
No, that's all
We're going to
right.
keep talking about the deck size for a while.
It,
The other
the,
thing is you can just
the,
draw a lot of cards and exceed. It's
right,
really easy to draw cards.
right, yeah. Draw two in this is something Taxi told me. Draw two in another in Magic is busted. In
Yep.
Exceed, draw two is like the slowest thing you can do. It's like the
Yep.
lowest tempo, frequently like the worst option you have in a lot of situations. That's like our floor in this game.
Yep. We can also change cards.
Yep.
As Goldlewis, we have a better change cards, which we don't even use that often because we just don't need to. But
Oh,
it's a nice option to have.
better. Oh, this guy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This
Spend up to
goose.
5
Yep.
force for each 4 spent. Draw two. Right. Okay.
So we can just draw 10 cards on one of our turns if we feel like 11, I guess, because of the end of turn draw.
Right.
Um, and then, as you mentioned, the succeed side, in addition to starting with more cards, we will draw even more cards during combat if we're winning strikes.
Right.
We have a really high deck velocity, so we can. There certainly is the case. I do want to say this is a real weakness. You might need a specific card, and you just might be unlucky and not see that exact card.
Right. But frequently, I've been in situations where like, okay, I need a slow right now. I need a guardy option, and I have four. Two of them are focus. One of them on May, for example, I have something that is sweep and something that's kind of like sweep. I don't care that much about which one it is, but I need one. Other times it's like I need block or I'm dead. And those
Yep.
situations are when his deck size is actually kind of a hindrance to him, it seems like.
Yes. Yeah, stuff like you need exactly a block. Well, that's hard because you have two blocks in your deck, you can't recur them, and you
Right.
might have spent them for something already.
And it's just harder to find them in a larger deck.
Yep.
Okay.
And you do have some. That is another thing. Your kit is a little low on slows, I think, statistically. You have a special slow at close range, and you have the normal slows.
Mhm.
Other than that, the remaining cards that can act as slows, you need to initiate or work at longer ranges. So at like range 1, if someone just plays a grasp, that's another thing. Your deck is very statistically weak to grasp. Every single one of your specials loses to initiated grasp.
Okay. Wow,
Or
yeah,
defensive grasp, actually. Every
you're
single one of your cards loses to initiated grasp.
yeah, you're kind of right. That's wild.
So even though you have sweep, focus, and somewhere here, I should probably organize these at some point. Behemoth
Yep,
Typhoon Crush.
please do.
Um, you will still kind of feel the lack of slows sometimes.
It's because you
Um,
don't have consistent answers to fast options.
yep.
Okay.
Um, that said, this is one of those things that your opponent, because Exceed is a hidden information game, your opponent has to like actually make the call that you're out of answers to fast options. Like, don't know automatically that.
Right.
So it's scary. It's like if you play against Biken and you assume she doesn't have all of her, um, shoot, Hiragi, is that the really threatening like
Oh,
9
the
delta?
the big ignore armor thing?
The counter, the 2 armor hit you back for
Oh,
7.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, if you don't know if you have an inkling that she doesn't have that, that might not be enough cuz you will remember it
Yeah, do you
forever.
really want to risk it?
Yeah,
Yeah, and
how
slows
badly.
are that kind of card. If you
Right.
lose to a slow, you're sad.
You're very, very sad. That's true.
So, oh no, I just broke my pretty organization. I'm gonna move it to this side. Hopefully that works. Okay, so I think that's about it on the deck side. Again, this is kind of why we want to. One of the reasons I want to play Toolboxy is I don't know when I'm going to draw my next sweep, so I don't really want to waste my sweep if I think I'll need it in the near future.
Right.
So we got pretty into Theory Craft. We haven't even talked about really these cards. We haven't even talked about the Succeed side much.
Yep.
Here's the Exceed side. It kind of continues the theme of we have a lot of cards. We don't get any stat bonuses for this. We just immediately draw some more cards, and in the future we draw even more cards.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really strong. We want to do this. Something that I have heard said is that these 2-gauge exceeds are often kind of they're
like
trying to encourage you to exceed. Like your exceed ability is your real ability.
They're like a tax. It's like a TAX, not the word attack. They're like in order to play the game, you need this ability, so we're gonna make it kind of cheap.
Yep. Yeah. And this one we even have a rebate. Like this is if you could have changed cards with that gauge and you would get the exact same amount of draw. So if you need to draw some cards, you should exceed. If
you should exceed, right? Because that puts you online for the rest of the game. So this is something that we should be doing pretty much every game.
Pretty much. Definitely exceed is a very variable game. Sometimes you are having a game where you don't want to exceed, but by and large, this is my game plan is to exceed when I can.
Okay. Good to know.
So, and because of all this card draw, this is why I'm going to call Goldlewis actually a pretty complicated character, despite all these simple effects, is because we just have a lot of choices every turn about what cards we're going to spend for force, what cards we're going to strike with, what cards we're going to boost with.
Right.
What cards we value having, what cards we need to get rid of now.
And I assume if part of your game plan is exceeding, I'm sorry to cut you off, Rose. When you are kind of budgeting your gauge, the first two, barring situations where you really really need to cancel out to get something that to deal with your opponent's pressure, are the first two gauge that you have earmarked for exceed? Like the earlier you do this, the better it is for your game plan.
Yes to the second part. The earlier you do this, the better. Unfortunately, no to the first, just because you are a Season 7 character and your neutral is pretty dependent on you being willing to cancel sometimes. Like, that's one of the ways your opponent can play around you, is force you to... Don't let you get those gauge easily. Make you, if you want to win a strike, spend that gauge.
Okay.
And...
So like a way to summarize the game plan part of his exceed side is like, or of getting into his exceed side is exceed as fast as your opponent will let you.
Yeah, pretty much.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, as opposed to initially, what you were saying initially, I would think of more like, if you want to play Exceed Zangief, I think you can play not Exceed Zangief. I just think Exceed Zangief is better.
Right.
You want to exceed the instant you can, because you go from 1 power on critical to 3 power on critical, and that's just insane.
Right. As soon as
Goldlewis.
Oh, for Zangief, it's like as soon as you have his success is 3. Yeah, as soon as you have 4 gauge
and 1 more for critical.
Yeah, to have the critical, that's what you're doing. With Goldlewis, there's a little bit more nuance to it.
Because you don't get any stat bonuses, you just get this hit effect, right?
Right.
You get to draw some cards, you get to draw more cards. Maybe you don't need to draw cards right now.
Sure.
It makes you better for the rest of the game, as exceeds tend to. And it makes you better in like a very real way. You want it, but it's something you can time.
Okay.
Like a lot of exceeds that draw cards, right? You also don't want to waste the card draw if your hand's full already.
Right.
Maybe there was a mistake getting to this point. Maybe you should have spent some cards to because you knew you would get enough gauge to exceed and be able to draw cards then. But yeah.
And it doesn't actually it doesn't increase his maximum hand size or anything. It's still 9. But now you're just drawing more cards. Okay.
Yeah. Though notably, as comes up for a lot of big hand characters or characters that have like these in strike draw effects, you can get past 9 as long as you keep striking, because hand size is only checked
when you draw a card and you don't draw a card when you strike.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, got it.
I haven't stayed past hand size 9 very long as Goldlewis very frequently, because you have ways to spend your resources for value, and if you have that many resources, you probably should.
Right.
But it can happen briefly. So now that we've spent a whole bunch of time talking about, like, here's what I think the kit is like, let's try to justify those claims by actually talking about the kit.
Sure. Okay.
Season 7 normals, I don't want to spend too long on these because they are the normals. A lot of characters have them. We have a lot of cards to talk about that aren't these. But the fact that we have Season 7 boosts matters quite a bit for us, because I think Goldlewis is one of the slower characters in Season 7. He's kind of this big, lumbering, heavy, hard-hitting guy.
Right.
The normals are a lot of your source of effects that change that. Here's your tech and then take another action. Here's your run in and do something. Pull them towards you, do something. Plus speed, which is pretty rare in your kit. Scramble, like make them have the right answer on top of their deck. And also here is your cards that don't lose to grasp.
Oh, sure, yeah. These 3 cards
Yep.
beat grasp just fine. None of these do.
Yep.
Got it.
So this, more than a lot of characters, your normals cover weaknesses in your kit, as opposed to kind of a lot of characters, more middle of the road, like Shoto type characters. Normals in their kit kind of are redundant. Like they give you more mix-up options. They give you
right.
Slightly different.
If I have, I mean, for an extreme example, you look at somebody like Yuzuriha, who has like assault,
Yes.
and then
Yeah,
special
assault and assault,
and then spike and special spike, and then focus and special focus. You don't really have that. You like none of the things that your normals do. It seems like have a direct like analog in your special kit.
by and large, yep. Even your mid speeds work at you do have you have a more different spike. Spike is probably the normal you least need the extra copies of.
Okay.
Because if you can win with a spike, you're already feeling pretty good. You don't need to win with 4 spikes to win the game.
True.
But yeah, you don't have good, reliable slows. You have an okay slow. You don't have this fast movement. You don't have ways to deal with speed boosts very well besides tech or like movement. So your normals are covering weaknesses in your kit. They're important.
And this is kind of continuing the theme of you have a lot of difficult decisions to make. It sounds like this is true of both your boosts and your attacks on the normals, right? Like okay, here's something that beats grasp, or no, a better example is here's a way to deal with your opponent's pressure by making them, diffusing their setup or making them have the right answer. But also, it's one of your things that deals with grasp. Like
Yep.
all of these things are pulling double duty as attacks and boosts, and you kind of need all of them.
Yep.
Okay.
Particularly, again, we'll keep going back to this, losing to grasp. It's really nice to have cards you can play it, and not just grasp, just aggressive options that like even their slash or their slash is probably the best example, or like range 4 dive. You don't have really great defensive tools in general.
Right.
These are like we generally talk about characters with more defensive tools than just these as being good at defense, like another slow, some above curve options. You don't have any of that really.
Right.
So these are important. And then in certain matchups, these are really important. Get in, pull them towards you, put them in the corner.
These are your like anti-zoning tools, but if you don't need them, you also need like on curve offense a lot of the time. So if you can spend them as attacks.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, yeah, depends on the matchup a lot, but this is your efficient movement.
I see.
Is just this dash and the move action. And the move action is hardly what we'd normally call efficient movement.
Right, yeah.
But
you
draw enough cards that we can kind of get away with it sometimes.
That makes sense. Okay.
So those are normals. And notably, we cannot recur them. Our recursion is very limited. It's strong. It does let us get back one of 8 different specials. It only lets us get back specials.
Not ultras, not normals. So you can't recur loop. You can't spend an ultra to get an ultra back forever.
Yeah, you can't do that. And you can't get back these normals that are covering your weaknesses in your kit because they're gone.
They're gone when they're gone. And you might not see them for a long time. So when you have them, marshal them carefully, use them carefully, because they're important to your game.
Yep.
Got it.
So now onto our actually unique cards. At a high level, they do, again, pretty nice variety of things. You've got some slows, you've got some mid-speeds, really good mid-speeds actually, some fasts, and a lot of good boosts. but they do also have some common weaknesses as well. So what they have going for them basically as a group, these are some really nice power values by and large. Here is 5, 5, 4, which is, 4 is average. This is one of
But
your weaker
but
power
with
cards.
but with 3 armor on it too.
Yep.
So high delta. 6,
6. 6 and an
6
armor.
and an armor. 4
4.
and
This is,
maybe 2 armor.
yep. Again, this is one of your lower power value cards. This is
Yep.
your actually low power value card at 3.
Right, these
And
two.
this one's 5 a
Yeah,
lot of
this
the
one's
time.
secretly 5, right?
You hit really hard. And you also have really good economic value on a lot of your cards. This one makes your opponent discard 2 at random. That's crushing.
Yeah.
Potemkin has a really scary mid speed. It lets them discard 2 cards of their choice when
Right.
it hits.
Yeah, I'm remembering Guile's his not his reverse sweep kick. His big scary command grab at 2,
Oh yeah,
the 3 the 3
the
speed
3
one.
speed 5 power. Yep.
Yeah, similar thing, but that one is a crit effect.
Yep.
You just get this for free if you hit.
Yep. Advantage. Draw 2 even if you don't hit. Draw 1, and then draw 2 on any of these
On
if you hit
anything,
with them.
right? So this a lot of these draw effects can get, when you compound them with your Exceed side, can get out of hand. You'll pardon the pun really quickly.
Yep. So yes, really high power, really high economic value for landing these. And you have ways to put resources into value. The part of that is because you're a season 7 character. You can spend your gauge on cancels. You also just have stuff like spend 2 force to strike with +1/+1. Spend 5 force to draw a bunch of cards. Spend 3 force to move in. This one I'm a little skeptical of. I like it has its place. It's a useful thing for you to have. It's a lot more like this is just a move action that costs you an extra card to play it and another card to cancel after that.
Right.
But if you have a lot of cards, it's really flexible, really fast movement that comes with plus power.
It like the that's the more rush downy you feel like being too. Like you are okay with incurring a few inefficiencies here and there if you have the resources to do it in order to do a thing quickly and to compress your action and to kill them before they can respond. So I feel like that might be for a slightly different line of play.
Yep, maybe. It definitely has its uses for sure as well, even in this line. But like this is part of why getting to the Succeed is so valuable is you need fuel for all of these effects that cost a lot of force.
Right. And the tension of being a toolbox character is that when you're discarding those cards as force, you're losing those options and you need to be able to evaluate what you do and don't still need.
Yep.
Okay.
You do have recursion. I would say this is pretty good recursion with its limitations. This is a very nice boost. It says, I'll get back a special that probably has a pretty high value to begin with and put 2 delta on it or whatever else I choose to play.
Right.
This one I value lower, but it certainly is a nice to have. It's like a little bit of movement and again recursion.
And the way that recursion works in Exceed, it doesn't come up super often. I actually don't think I've had a chance to ask. When you are recurring something, it is from a public area. The discard, everybody can see it. They know what is going into your hand, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It's probably like it's a courtesy to just show them, but like they know, so
They
you
know.
should show
Okay.
them.
And because you have so many cards in your hand most of the time, that doesn't mean that they know that you're going to strike with it or something, but they know that it's coming back.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So we've talked about kind of these like universal strengths in the kit. Here's some universal weaknesses. We don't get to break the speed curve without working for it. None of these cards are above curve.
Okay.
This card is above curve, and it is a 2 gauge, 3 damage DP.
Yeah. Hence his kind of you were talking about he's bad on defense. No great slows and also no above curve options is a recipe for tough defense, I think.
Yep. You are weak on defense. That is exactly the next thing I was going to get to. There are some caveats to this. This is a pretty good defensive card at certain ranges. It's not a good defensive card at range 2 or 1.
Okay.
But at range 3 or 4, this is pretty nice. This is very stable. You're not likely to win a strike big with this card on defense, but you have 3 armor.
Right.
And as we said earlier, weak to grasp and other evasive options. You have pretty surprisingly funky hitboxes on these cards.
Yeah, there's a lot of like range gaps, range shadows on some of them.
Yep. This is probably this is just an on curve range free card.
Right.
So yeah. But all your slows lose to grasp. Some of them you're fine with that. This one, if this slow when you initiate it loses to grasp, you take 1 damage and you draw 2 cards. It's not the worst trade in the world,
Right.
but it's not something you're happy about. Obviously, it's just you'd rather lose with grasp to this. Lose to grasp with this than with something else.
Then with something else, and you'd prefer to not lose to grasp at all.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
So other thing we have our specials. We have a pattern that makes them a little easier to remember. We have 2 pairs, or we have a pair for each speed from 2 to 5.
Oh,
And of that pair, one
hence
has an
your
initiate bonus.
hence your organizational structure here. Okay. So
Yes.
we got our 2, 3, 4, 5, and all of these are if you initiated, you get a different stat for each card. Okay. I
Yep.
like
So this one does also break the rule a bit. This one is speed 6 when you initiate it,
right,
which is good
right.
because it's on curve.
The
It's
the
also speed 4 when you don't initiate it, so it's really bad on defense. Do not
okay.
defend with this card.
Okay, that makes sense. And you're not yeah, no, that makes sense. So this is specifically an offensive option. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, kind of. All of these really are offensive options because
Right.
of yeah.
Because you have bad defense.
Yep. So now we've talked about kind of like the general parts of the cards. Let's talk about the specials.
Okay.
Here is your somewhat low value slow. Compare this to sweep or focus. It has less delta. It gets less economic value. They have 6 delta. This has 5. They draw or discard cards. This doesn't. This has an after close 2, but that's kind of a. It's more of a softening of the lose condition than something that you get when you win with it. Because
Right.
if you're closing 2, you didn't hit.
If you're hitting with this, you uh you're at least close enough that you would only close one.
Yep, and you
Okay.
don't even necessarily want to be at range 1 because that's where you lose to grasp. Range 2 is where every card in your deck hits.
Okay.
Um, range 1's not bad for you,
But that grasp is scary.
yep. So yeah, somewhat low value slow. The ignore armor does matter. Like this is something you can use to beat block and end the game. That's a
Right.
mix up that they have to respect. And this close 2 gives you sort of grappler movement. You are this kind of slow, lumbering character that wants to be at
Right.
close range or on your turn. This is a way to do that.
To make it explicit, grappler movement for people who maybe have not seen Dee's excellent lesson on Tager, for example, grappler movement is when you are willing to trade life for an in strike movement. So if I'm
Yep.
being zoned out very hard as Goldlewis by New 13, for example, I am totally fine putting this down, or maybe in some circumstances putting something like Assault or Dive down to say, really, I'm trading 1 force for 3 squares of movement, or 3 spaces of movement, or 2 for or 1 for 2 spaces of movement. Um,
Yep.
so I'm up on my card economy in exchange for life, and I'm trading that life to move in closer where I can actually run my offense. Is that a good way to sum it up, Rose?
Yep. That sounds good. And also, Goldlewis, you don't like their opponent's cross very much. Not many characters do. Just getting people into the corner is another use for grappler movement.
Right.
Make their cross weaker. So this is a card that certainly has a use. It also, again, you have sweep, you have focus, you have this on offense, but only on offense. And this is your your slow that will work on defense in your deck. This has 6 guard.
Yeah. And that is, and it's sweep like where it, 2 speed 6 guard. We would call that safe enough, right? Short of a lot of power bonuses and things like that. This is probably going to be okay. It's just sort of lower value than we would expect from something like sweep.
Yep.
Okay.
The boost on this huge. This boost is pretty good. Reach is an interesting boost. I feel like it's sometimes reaches the older boost, which is 1 force for +0 to 1 range, now strike.
Now strike, right.
This is a little more expensive because it rather than costing a force, you have to cancel it. But you don't actually have to cancel it. This is more flexible. You can play it as it is. You can play it and cancel it. You can play it, cancel something else.
Right.
This push or pull 1 is nice. And you as Goldlewis have the economy to play this kind of thing. If you have the gauge for it, because gauge will be kind of limiting for you.
So your
Um,
card draw and your force expenditures are not quite infinite, but they're good enough to do what you need them to do. Your gauge is not free.
yes.
Okay.
But yeah, this is a strong boost for you. It also notably it does cover the weakness to grasp with various cards. You still
Mm.
need to like actually not get stunned by grasp, which is
Not
only
tr-
true
not
for a
trivial.
couple of your specials.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you can attack with this at range 4. You can attack with this on curve, maybe if you have on curve. Um, you can do a lot of things with huge. This is one of your ways to break the speed curve. You don't have that many of them.
Right. It also, if you're talking about people being afraid of cross or Goldlewis being afraid of people's crosses, obviously range on sweep at range 1 feels pretty
Yep.
good to
Yeah.
turn that option off. So you would put this on a lot of normals, benefit a lot from extra range, and a couple of your faster specials is where you'd kind of advocate using this.
Yeah, by and large.
Okay.
This is also it's nice because it's a boost that you can just kind of play in neutral for value. Like you can play it in past turn. It does something.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think I play this card as huge more often than as crush, but they're both important.
Yep. Okay.
Here's our other speed 2. This is our really spicy mid speed. This is a speed 2 mid speed, so we have to initiate with it to beat sweep.
Right.
Um, it has this funny property that it will trade with EX sweep because it gets the extra guard. Um, that is a pretty niche thing, but it could matter. Um, what is notable about this relative to Spike? Uh, it doesn't ignore armor, so you can't use it to close out the game. It does gain advantage. That's really powerful,
Yeah. On a
and it
mid
won't
speed.
get hit back by sweep because it'll get
Right.
to push your.
And um, the downside here, sweep is a card that is frequently um safest to play at range 1. So people will be jockeying into position against you to play sweep at range 1 if they can. This does not hit there. So
Yep.
it is a mid speed in the same way that Spike is a mid speed, and it has the same range shadow problem against sweep that Spike does. But it's one of the reasons that you're okay with standing at range 2, and they're going to be very scared of you when you are.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
this mid speed when you land it is amazingly high reward. It is a little position negative. We'll talk more about the idea of like what's position negative for Goldlewis when we get to a later special.
Okay.
But you do, if you hit a sweep with this, you probably need to push them too, or else you're losing a lot of the value this gave you.
Right.
And then you're out at long range where most of your cards don't hit. But you do have advantage, so that's cool.
Right.
Even
And
then.
at minimum, you could use that advantage to move in on somebody and continue your pressure that way, or make them come to you, as you were saying earlier.
Yep.
Okay.
So and okay, this goes for the mid speeds especially, but all the cards in your kit get way more valuable once you've exceeded. Um, push 2, gain advantage, draw 2, deal 6 damage, don't get hit back. That's a really good strike.
Right.
And you do have the draw 2 on it because once you've exceeded.
And
Um,
because we are hopefully exceeding early in the game, for maybe for more than half of the game, once we've left the early game, we can sort of start mentally adding on draw 2, hit draw 2 to all of these things, because for the majority of the game, if things are going well, we'll be doing that.
yep.
Okay.
I feel like it affects some cards more than others. Like this card is not, unfortunately, a card you expect to hit very often. It's
True.
just that sad but true.
Right.
This is also these two are not cards you expect to hit super often because they're mid speeds. But when they do,
When they do,
they'll be really punishing.
you feel pretty good when you get advantage 6 damage, dodge a sweep, and draw 2 all at once.
Yes, exactly.
I gotcha.
So this is more of the risky high reward, but very high reward.
Mhm.
The boost is niche. It's a key charge, a slow key charge. Your opponent can interact with it and stop it from being that, though. The cancelable is actually pretty important. I feel like most of the time when I play this boost, it's because my opponent is cornered and I have a payout.
Right.
This stops them from like diving past your really scary like +1/+1 sweep or something. Just forces them to actually interact with that when they're in the corner.
Right. and in the same way that this turns off cross as an option to deal with sweep, this turns off dive in some positions as an option to deal with sweep.
Yep.
Okay.
So pretty niche boost, pretty niche card. As I was saying earlier, Goldlewis cards tend to be they tend to be well balanced between the two sides. Either side of this, you're going to need a specific situation to play it, but in that situation, it'll be strong.
Right. And
Um,
part of your challenge of navigating Goldlewis's hand is figuring out whether or not that situation is worth pursuing in order to pay out with a card.
yep.
Okay.
This is funny with huge. It still loses to dive, but it exists.
Right.
This is your more reliable mid speed, which is funny. It's still like a pretty unsafe mid speed.
It's the one with with no guard on it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it has free speed and it works at range 1, which are both cool things for mid speeds. This one actually can defend against slows at range 1.
It's much more traditionally shaped as a mid speed. Like if you thought of like a classic sort of like semi spike, ignore spike like 5 power 3 speed, some kind of ignore guard, ignore armor rider. That's very mid speed, right? It ticks all the boxes.
Yep. And as we said earlier, I think this is a pretty high reward. Discard 2. Once you're exceeded, draw 2 as well.
Draw 2 as well, yeah. Big resource pressure at that point.
And the thing about mid-speeds like this is you can use them to kind of filter out your worst options. Like if you say, I don't really want to get hit with sweep or focus the strike, this can say that.
Right.
And that's important as well.
Even on defense.
Yep. So, good card. This is a mid-speed you'll probably be landing more often. Either of these mid-speeds, landing them will put you very ahead. But this is the one that you're more likely to land.
Right.
The boost is pretty niche. I think like a boost like this makes you'd assume it's best against zoning. That's probably correct. The way I play Goldlewis, I don't tend to have too much issue with zoning. I have not played a bunch of Goldlewis against like new, for instance, maybe.
The dedicated zoners.
Yeah. But you have move action, you have your limited assault boosts, etc. I don't like relying on this boost too heavily. That said, in some matchups, you're probably never going to hit this attack just by looking at the enemy kit.
Sure.
Or like the way that their character likes to play. And the boost has some value, especially versus zoning. It does something.
And in a situation where nothing is useful about this card, in some matchup where you won't use either side, you do need something to spend as force occasionally. And without depriving yourself of a useful option, this could be it.
Yep. So, pretty flexible card. As usual for Goldlewis cards here. This one is one of the ones I like quite a bit. This is Behemoth Typhoon Smash. It is a slow when you initiate with it. When you defend with it, it's not very good. But when you initiate with it, it is 3 speed and 5 effective guard, 2 of which is armor, 6 delta. Gets you draw. Once you're exceeded, gets you even more draw, possibly.
Draw 4 if you hit.
Yep. So this is just one of your really reliable cards. This will be a mix-up with this card here at range 2 for when you want to do something fairly reliable. You could do something fast and reliable or slow and reliable.
Right.
Or you can do something completely crazy as well.
And they have to, because you have all of these options represented, because we're playing him like a toolbox, your opponent needs to be thinking about all of those things at all times if you're playing him right.
Yep.
Got it.
The boost kind of flips the script. It is, instead of a very reliable kind of, this card is very stable in value. You're not going to win too hard against most things. You're not going to lose too hard against most things. This is better fierce. This is 2 power and advantage. This is a really scary boost.
Yeah.
The thing about fierce is best when you're in an advantage situation to begin with. And by the way your neutral works, it's hard to set that up for Goldlewis. You tend to play mix-ups in neutral. You tend to play kind of slow, steady. You push your opponent to the corner. You trade up. You can't just drop. I don't know, if you were new or someone, you'd probably strike at range 4, but if you dropped fierce at range 4, your opponent has to respect that because you're new. They can't beat you. They have to move. if you're Goldlewis and you drop Fierce and you don't have a plan, they can probably just strike into it and not get hit.
Right. They can play to not get hit. You empty cross at 3 or something, and I don't have any above curve options in my whole kit.
Yep. You don't even need
And
to be at 3. You can just play cross at range 2
yeah, cross
unless
at
you're
range
threatening
2.
the EX
Yeah,
or have
cross.
2 gates for the Ultra. Yep.
So those are the kinds of situations where, like, in order to play this, you do need a plan.
Yep.
And those
But
plans could be an EX attack or an Ultra, but you need something.
yep. So that's yeah. Kind of going back to the mid speeds, right? This is why Goldlewis is this big, scary guy. Is like you have these high powers. If you land like a brute strength or
Right.
drop or whatever, especially once you exceed it, you gain advantage. The opponent discards, you draw. Just lots of riders on your attacks. In addition to already having a high power value, it's very
Right.
punishing to get hit by a high investment Goldlewis strike.
So you would use brute strength, as you said, when you're already in an advantaged position. So if you're trying to corner your opponent to deal with cross, that's an option. Something like that to mitigate their ability to just kind of freely say, like, no, I'm not going to participate in your scary mix up.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
you need to be set up for this boost, but when you are, it's really strong
Okay.
because it's
And
better fierce, and
yeah,
fierce is already really good.
and fierce, like, it's kind of pretty understood exceed wisdom. I think at this point, people who are watching this probably know +2 power hits important breakpoints. Look for
Yep.
sevens. Look for sevens and eights. Put enough power on something to break sweep or break focus is generally a good call. Um, Especially if it can be like an on curve thing. Uh,
Yep.
Keeping in mind that your opponent will deny you value if they can with something like cross. Uh, so not not actually looking at any of this stuff. I'm seeing like
Here's a
this.
good just the crush we talked about earlier. If they're in the corner and can't
Yeah,
cross out of it,
yeah.
this beats sweep, now this beats focus,
They
now
have to
this beats
dive. They
block.
have to dive basically.
Yep. You can
Yeah.
trade down. You can play like a slash and deal 4 damage, and then get hit back for 7 and get advantage stolen back.
Right, which
Like
is
there's
which
just not really good options unless
yeah,
you are willing to make the call out dive.
that does not, and you could, even if you really wanted to, you could mitigate that option too if you had the gauge for it.
Yep.
But the point you're making, though, I think, is that unlike other characters who can set the conditions of, who can establish those advantage scenarios more easily, Goldlewis is sort of fighting to get to that position for longer. So you
Yes,
are- so
exactly.
so
Yep.
you aren't as likely to be able to say, like, awesome, and a great opportunity for brute strength. Most of the game is going to be spent getting to a great opportunity for brute strength, and you might be spending the card that brute strength is on in order to get to that point in the first place.
Yeah, this is like a pretty clear choice. You have this very reliable attack and this very unreliable but high reward boost,
Right.
and you'll have to decide which is the right one for the
Right.
situation.
But if your opponent has made a mistake and you've gotten them into a situation where they don't have their answers anymore, okay, now you can
Yeah.
kill them with this. That's what this is for.
Yep.
Okay, makes sense.
Um. So now, slam. This card does a lot of work for you. This is your range 4 game, like all of it in this one card. Um, and it's does a pretty good job of that. I'll save it for later. The Skyfangs comparison, it will come back. But this is better Skyfangs. This is a good card. This is a very safe defensive option. In the worst case, you're going to be like dived and take 2 damage.
Right.
Against a lot of fast dives, this just beats them handily because they come in at
They
speed 5, they hit you for 3 damage, which does nothing. They push you 1,
they are
get hit
they
back for 4, and you have positioning control.
fast dives often stop at range 2 or move close in 3, but then push you to establish range 2, and you don't care about any of that.
Yep. It also often just beats both sides of the fireball mix-up. Like,
Hmm.
or actually, in this case, let's say all 3 sides of a fireball mix, or all 4 sides of a fireball mix-up. There are all these cards in Testament Kit that hit at range 4. None of these, played alone, will beat Behemoth Typhoon Slam. It guards through these left 2, and it outspeeds
It
these right
outspeeds.
2.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, I was trying to figure out how it beats the ignore armor one, and I was like, oh right, there's a speed value on this card.
Yep. So this is just a really solid defensive option at range 4. This is what makes your You as a character do not like the early game board state very much for a lot of reasons, because most of your cards don't work there. You don't have any gauge. This is what keeps you in the game right at the start, is that it's really hard to strike into at range 4. And you can also strike into people at range 4 yourself, and it works pretty well a lot
Right
of the time.
now it beats dive, because you're initiating with it. Uh, you'll stun that out, no problem. You have positioning control. You'll lose the armor, but I mean, if you don't
Yeah.
need the armor, you're not so sad about losing it. And
That is, yeah.
the same thing about fast dives still apply. Fast dives are great defensive options.
But
If
most of
you
them not into this.
Yeah, if you're anticipating a dive from Goldlewis, and then they fast dive in, and everything you just said about a fast dive losing to this still applies, even if you initiated with it.
Yep.
Okay,
There are downsides to initiating with this. One, you don't have it anymore.
right.
Two, if they defend with like a sweep, what do? You have to push them, because if you pull them, now you're trading down on
Now
your own turn
yeah,
really badly.
and you don't really have a range 5 game at all.
Yep, and you just spent some of your range 4 game. I mean, I
Right.
guess you could push them and then boost this and go back to range 4 and get it back. Stuff like that. You
Yeah.
can. But yeah, again, sort of positioning negative. Mostly, the biggest problem is you don't have a follow up if you initiate with it a lot of
Right.
the time.
Right.
So it's a really stable defensive tool. It exists on offense. It's hard to say this about a card that just kind of works on offense, but you don't always want to strike with it either.
Right. Does it still have utility at closer ranges? I feel like the armor seems
At
like
range
it's
3,
often useful. Yeah.
this does really okay things on defense. Like, you can get assaulted, you'll take 1 damage, like an advantage. It's not great, but you didn't take more. You can
Right.
get dived, you'll take 2 damage. That's it. You can get spiked. No, you win.
Oh yeah, because you can push him out of range.
Yep. So this is good at range 3 as well. People might overlook that, but yeah, just defend
Right.
us at range 3. It's again a really stable defensive card. Um, this card is one that I like trying to keep in my hand for those reasons.
Right.
Just this will do a lot for you. And then the boost gives me even more reason for that. This boost is better change cards that comes with +1 power.
Yeah.
Um, the way we're going to play, we don't need this very often, but when you do need this, it's really nice to have, because this bails you out of your worst case, where you're bad at defense. You're not likely to see any particular card on a wild swing because your deck is bigger and you don't have multiples. If you are running out of cards in hand, you're in trouble, and this says, no, I'm not in trouble anymore.
Right.
I have a new hand.
And I assume, because you're not really advocating for like a hyper aggressive rush down line, but another way to use this card would be to go way over your maximum hand size to dig for the specific thing that you want.
You could. This isn't cancelable or anything, though. You would have to discard down.
Discard down, exactly.
What you will do with it sometimes is, this is a good way to get through your reshuffle. Is
Oh, sure.
yeah. In that case, yeah, you might want to overdraw and discard like normals or something,
Right.
or just yeah,
But
get good cards back into your deck before the reshuffle.
as we were sort of talking about earlier, like the times that you need exactly this card, rather than even in a kit like Goldlewis's, who doesn't have a ton of redundancy, the times you need exactly this card rather than a card that kind of works like this card are fairly rare. So digging for a specific answer, first of all, you might not even find it in the number of cards you're drawing because your deck is so big, but
Yeah,
it might not be as important as it looks for someone with his cards.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I value this boost very highly, but a lot of it is just for that bailing you out of your worst cases use,
Right.
where like if things are going bad, now you're back in the game.
Yeah, you've whiffed too many strikes in a row. You need to get it back online.
Yep. And this
Okay.
incidental +1 power is nice. Like, people underrate +1 power. It matters. You have +1 power in a couple of places in your boost kit. It adds up, especially if you start boosting multiple of them. But
Right.
even just +1 power with nothing added is enough to make your sweeps way scarier, to make
Right.
your low power options way scarier. So, nice to have. Puts you in a good situation after boosting it.
Makes sense.
Here's our remaining speed 4 card. This is the one that cheats. This is actually speed 6 on offense, which gives you a non-curve option at range 2. Which is nice, because you are an aggressive character that doesn't like long range, and aggressive characters that don't like long range need something that does the job of cross without putting you at range 5.
Right. So we've made the we made the guile comparison earlier with this card. Uh Six
Yeah.
speed close in gain advantage. It's not above curve the way that Guile's I think double sweep kick is, but it shares a similar role of like
Yep.
all of your big scary mid speeds lose to cross. This is for cross.
Yep.
Okay.
That gains advantage, which is nice. You don't have very much advantage in the kit. It's like just this brute strength and your normals, your slash.
Right.
Um, and gaining advantages when you can draw 2 cards at the same time is cool. Yeah. So very reliable card. Again, these are like your reliable. I'm just going to press a button and hope that it, like, unless they have something special going on, it'll work reasonably well.
It'll probably be fine.
This one can serve a similar function. This one can serve a similar function. And then the other 4 are much more
Like
either setup or mix-up-y.
Committal mid speed mix up things.
Yeah.
Makes
But yeah,
sense.
this is often a card you'll play like right after you exceeded to start getting value out of the exceed. Like, okay, I exceeded, I'm gonna start drawing more cards.
Immediately draw cards because it'll probably work.
Yep.
Okay.
The boost I talked about a little bit earlier. This is +1 power, flexible movement, but expensive, cancelable. I would say if you are going to boost this and move and not cancel, just take the move action. You're spending an extra force to do this. You're spending an option. You're getting 1 power out of it, but just take the move action.
Right.
When you do want to use this boost, when you're going to cancel it, and you don't have to spend any force if you're going to cancel it. Sometimes just cancelable +1 power is good enough. But if you have the cards in hand and you need to be at close range and strike, this works. If you have to move 3 though, like this costs you 1 force and 1 gauge, this costs you 4 force and 1 gauge to move 3.
Right.
So,
and the +1 power might not be worth 3 force.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So be careful about using this boost. It's definitely like having flexible cancelable movement is strong. It's useful. Just don't overcommit if you can avoid it.
Makes sense.
Then I guess if you have the choice, say, between I'm going to boost slash and then play this, or I'm going to boost this and then play slash, this one will draw you 2 cards when it hits.
True.
As well.
True, yeah.
So,
and that's probably worth more than 1 damage.
Yep.
Okay.
So we are on to Hurl and Rise. Hurl, this is a payout card. This is way more power than you're normally allowed to have at this speed. This is also very close to on curve. It's just 1 below curve at range 2. So if you just like put EX on this, it becomes now you beat everything but focus and you trade pretty well with focus.
Right. So so you would EX this either natively or from badass.
Yep.
Because we're a toolbox character, any preferences one way or another? I feel like
probably badass, especially since you're more likely, like if you have 2 sweeps and 2 hurls, you're more likely to draw a sweep and a hurl than you are to draw both hurls.
Right.
But you know,
do what you
good
got.
card. Do what you got to do. Yep, do what you have. The boost is strong. That's another reason you might not want to EX it, is because this is for Goldlewis. This is a lot of the power of an EX. It's just a +1 power, +1 speed, and you can combine it with an EX. So spending both the copies of the boost as well as the attack is sad.
Right.
But yeah, do what you have to do. This is a payout. You'll probably land it for like 8 damage once a game at least, and that'll be really nice when it happens.
So in order to set up that payout, we're looking for things like canceling from Skyfish, badass,
huge works.
Huge works, sure. Something to make it on curve at 3. Brute strength seems excessive.
Yeah, brute strength doesn't help. I mean, it makes it beat slows, but it doesn't put it on curve. I mean, if you can get away with it, absolutely.
Right.
But,
yeah.
It doesn't solve the problems the card has currently. Basically,
if they give you a turn after, if they give you a turn not striking into brute strength because they need to prep or something, because you've been pressuring them successfully, huge cancel into hurl seems pretty devastating.
Yep.
Okay.
This boost, you might not be obvious when you read it. It does have 2 modes. You don't like people love doing Now Strike. I love doing Now Strike. You don't have to. You can just play this with Swift.
Right.
I do tend to go for the Now Strike because I don't. This is a really rare boost in your kit. This gives you speed. I
Speed. Yeah.
don't want to like put it down and then have it go away. And you do have force to get away with it, but in a lot of situations. But you can play. This is one of the lines of Goldlewis that one of the differences, I think, if you play a little more defensive Goldlewis, you can put this down as Swift, and
And
that makes your defense a lot better.
make them deal with it, sure. And
Yeah.
and the speaking of the action compression into a strike, like this is kind of adjacent to a cancel. It's less flexible. It's not coming from your gauge, but
Yep.
your force is in in greater abundance than your gauge tends to be, right? So you might be able to pay this more easily than you could pay for a cancel.
Yep. Notably, you do need to cancel first because this one does strike. It's
Hi,
not taking another action. You
it
can't do like 2 of these.
Right. It ends the chain no matter where you play
Yep.
it. Okay.
But yeah, strong card, strong boost. Again, I guess going back to, do you naturally EX it? If you're going to like boost this card and then play it, you might as well just EX it, right? That saves you 2 force on a gauge, or just 2 force.
It's basically you're getting the more valuable parts out of the EX, but you could just actually EX it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And this card is strong. This card is on curve. It's somewhat position negative with caveats, but we'll talk about that in a moment.
Right.
But this is a speed 5 range 3 card that beats sweep and does 5 damage and draws you a card or 3 cards. This card is super solid, except it pushes the opponent away.
Right.
Um,
just it being on curve sounds pretty good to me right now after we sort of went through the land of mid speeds back there.
Yep. There are 2 on curve cards, and this is the only one on curve on defense.
Right.
That matters. This is so. Now that we've kind of looked at all the specials really quickly, which of them do we actually want to play EX? I will say it is these 2.
Okay, your 2 speed 5s.
Yep, because as an EX, this beats focus now, but it doesn't, like, it's a little better, but it doesn't notably change that many interactions. This changes basically no interactions except they can't defend with Spike, which, to be fair, if they do beat this with a defensive Spike, that's a really good turn for them.
Right.
But in every other case, EX this is very similar to normal this.
Right.
EX this, it's speed 4. That's the main difference, is like you can't dive out of it. But again, if it connects, it's going to win. If it doesn't connect, it's going to lose. EX this has some more delta, but loses and wins to all the same things. EX this has more delta, loses and wins to all the same things with the exception of like a defensive DP.
Right.
EX this has more delta, loses and wins to basically all the same things. And now you've used, for all these EXs, you've used both copies of the card.
You've used both copies. You'd prefer to have them live. Okay. And then these 2, though.
This one, the EX just becomes on curve 7 damage and very easy to staple more power onto because you're Goldlewis.
High damage on curve already sounds like a good recipe for an EX just because it's close to breakpoints in a couple different directions, right? Like it could be on curve, It could be dealing 7 damage. You're fine with that.
This one is a little funkier. I would not EX this on offense, but having an EX 5 speed on curve on defense is valuable, right? Like your opponent probably is not playing around you having this, especially if they've seen a slash go down.
In the same reason that like that D absolutely loves EX assault, EX slash. It works with this too, but now I guess you're not dealing
You're not getting the bonus damage, but you don't need to, right? Because you're still going to beat the Spike, for instance, by pushing it away.
You're still pushing, you're still drawing, you're getting quite a bit of benefit out of this anyway. That makes sense.
Yep. So these are the cards I think get notably improved by the EXs. But this one, both of them again, the opportunity cost, like we were just talking about. Right. This is a really good card. You can make it stronger in other ways than naturally EXing it. This is a really good card. You don't need to even EX it if you could just strike with it.
Right.
It's just on defense that EX is a really good surprise option, and this EX gets you to this is already stronger, like you need it to be. This boost is solid. I think this boost is kind of slept on because this attack is obviously very good, but this boost is it says you're not getting stunned on the next strike, effectively. Right. Very close to. and it draws, and it's cancelable. So if you're just like at range 1 and you want to try to close out the game, boost this, draw a card, maybe you got something amazing. If not, cancel it, strike with slash.
Right.
It's your turn again. And a lot of cards are balanced around defend or like faultless defense or just the native 4 guard on a lot of cards. This is 6.
Sure.
Any card
Yeah.
that relies on stunning something with 4 guard will not stun whenever you put this on.
Right. And not many cards rely on stunning something with 6 guard, and if they are, they're dangerous cards. And so putting it on something with a little bit of guard, there's very few things that can stun something with 10 guard.
Yep. So this card just very, very stable on both sides, really. Like
Right.
you will get value out of this no matter what you do with it.
Right. And one thing that I've kind of picked up from other lessons that seems relevant here. You mentioned specifically assault slash as being a good recipient to this. It's like uh putting a guard onto something that has a flexible range band. So like this is a range 1 to 3 with a close effect. So if they back up, you know, it would
Yep.
also really benefit this. But if they moved out of your range, you're still losing even if they didn't stun you. Whereas something like slash, when you're not in a position to play slash perfectly at its strengths at range 3, range 1 slash
Yeah.
works great with this, for example.
Yep. That's actually a great segue because that's the thing I'm going to mention as the weakness of this boost. 6 guard does say you're not being stunned. It doesn't make a lot of your cards beat grasp.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it makes none of your cards beat grasp except the other copy of this card.
Right. Grasp wasn't worried about stunning it anyway. It was worried about depositioning you.
So yeah, this or slash are what will beat grasp after you boost this.
Okay.
There are some funny things, like this comes up a lot for like EX Shovel Knight for reasons, but if you have specific board situations, grasp is weaker. Like if you are like this and you boost 6 guard and you play this, you actually beat grasp now because
Right.
they cannot get you out of range.
They can't get you away far enough.
Yep. So
Right.
keep an eye out for stuff like that. That does matter. Or like this, now you beat cross with this, with whatever you want to do. Because they're still not dodging. You're not getting stunned anymore.
They can't spike you. They got to call you out with a dive.
Yep.
Same corner pressure that we've been describing with your slows and mid speeds. It still works when it just gives your it gives your cards more flexibility if you're not worried about getting stunned. But if they have other ways to beat your cards than stunning them, it's less valuable. So situations where they can't do those things to beat you other ways, this boost is more powerful. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Like a lot of guard boosts kind of position independent, right? Because
right.
Yeah, you need to connect even if you have the guard to not get stunned. So that's the specials. Ultras. I don't tend to play Ultras a lot as Goldlewis, but they're worth thinking about.
Okay.
Their boosts give you recursion, so like you will find ways, and they're 2-force. You'll find ways to get value out of them without playing them, even if your gauge is spoken for elsewhere. This is one of your best boosts. This boost is completely acceptable, and look, it's 2-force.
Right.
But they are worth thinking about in their situations. So let's talk about what their situations are. This is the weaker of your Ultras again. As I was saying, like Goldlewis cards, both sides tend to be of similar value. This is the weaker of your Ultra boost. This is the weaker of your Ultra attacks.
Right.
This one is pretty commonly 2-force. And let's say you're here and you just have this card. Do you want to play it? Probably not, because they can't dodge it. But if they just play sweep, you spent 3 gauge and traded down.
Right, and if you're striking in at this range, you're doing this or block probably, unless you're engaging in some serious grappler movement.
Yep. I mean, and like again, versus like a new or something, like okay, this will get you in. That's cool.
Right.
That's what card is probably for on its face of it. There are a few things though. This card is weak until it isn't. You're sitting at this range and you boost like brute strength. Your opponent knows what you want to do, but what can they do about it?
What are they going to do? Block or die?
Yep. Like maybe they can initiate focus to like waste the advantage, but you still now have closed in on their turn and traded up, and
right.
It's not bad. And if they don't initiate focus, then on your next turn, you go like, okay, I'm going to boost this and cancel, and now I'm hitting
Cancel
you
it.
for
Now
8 damage and
hit
advantage.
hit focus. Uh, eight spaces of movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
So
that
this
is
card's weak
insane.
until it isn't.
Right.
Luckily, also, again, back to like the toolbox thing, you don't need a second copy of this for any reason. Like it's nice if you have this. You don't need a second boost to make it 8 power because you have an EX.
You have EX, sure.
But you can spend the first one pretty freely, so you might as well. It's
And
2
the
force. You
and
can
the
spend
the
force.
the boost you've discussed a couple times. It's a little bit of positioning fixing if you need it, but it's more for the recursion. And
Yep.
you
Because
don't
if you
really
need to position with this card, move action. Move
right
action's great.
right. You might as well just because you got two force right
2
sitting
force.
there in your
Yep.
hand. And I assume from the discussion of the toolbox stuff, there is not a card that you would prefer to recur the way that like Mole Knight's recursion is like, I'm gonna get headbutt. And if I have
Yeah,
another
it's
one,
definitely.
I'm gonna get headbutt again. This is like what you need when you need it.
Yep. Yeah. There are certainly some cards you're more likely to recur than others, and I can actually talk about that a little
Sure.
bit. Let's finish the altars first, and then
Yeah.
because this one also recurs.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But
It's a
yeah.
good segue.
But yeah, pretty flexible there. Other Ultra, this is your only naturally above code card, and it's expensive for that. This is like a really bad DP, right?
Right. Yeah,
For 1 force, you can get, I don't know, Ragnus DP, let's say. This is what a 1 force DP should look like. I mean, this is admittedly a particularly good
yeah,
1 force DP.
this is a pretty nutty card.
But for 1 force, you get 5 damage on offense, +1. On defense, these are identical, except this one costs a force instead of 2 gauge.
2 gauge, yeah.
So this is overpriced. Nice thing about that is people don't expect it. Like, no one strikes into Goldlewis at range 2 and says Goldlewis is going to defend with non-EX down of the system. And you
Right.
can, and sometimes it'll work.
Right.
But yeah, pretty overpriced.
DPs, even if they're overpriced, are important to represent as a threat in your kit because it turns off some offensive options, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And then the EX text, this is really fun. This makes it a 1/2 8/8 for 4 gauge. 8/8 is a very good stat line,
Yeah.
shockingly.
Yeah, I can't believe it.
But this is where I'll go back to like when you. I don't play to get this EX for a couple of reasons. Your deck is big. You're likely to see cards that you want. Seeing 2 copies of one exact card is relatively unlikely. This boost is one of your stronger boosts. This just says get back any special or special boost you want and get some delta for the next strike.
Right.
You play kind of like slow, like you are working your way in and pushing the opponent to the corner. Even if you lose a strike, this armor is valuable. This boost does a lot for you. So you are incentivized to spend this card for its boost.
Makes it
You're
tougher
not guaranteed to see
EX
both
it.
copies of it.
Yeah.
Yep. And even if you have both copies of it, if you are here and you are worried about a Goldlewis card that's not a normal, and you want to parry me to parry the Goldlewis card, you should parry this card 100% of the time.
Okay.
Because if you parry this card, okay, I'll have it back and +1 power, +1 armor.
You get it back and it's scarier now.
Yeah. So this is a parry target. This is a good boost. You're not guaranteed to see both. If they fall into your lap, you get both of these. You draw the second one. You have 3 gauge. Absolutely, go for it. But don't plan around getting it because a lot of things can happen that make you not have it.
Right. Okay.
It is pretty telegraphed too, right? Like if you see Goldlewis strike into you with an EX and 4 gauge, you should be thinking about this.
But also, like, there are very limited things that you can do.
Yes, that's true.
A 1/2 8/8 short of
Block.
I block, or I know you love like elusive flash and things like that. Like if you have a specific dodge,
yes, you need something very
mind,
specific to beat this. Otherwise, you just have to block it.
Yeah, or just take 8.
Yep. Something you can do is like, if you are late into your deck, you can hold the X over the opponent. Like makes them really scared to strike into you at range 2.
Sure.
But it's a good card when it's good. I don't think it's good enough to warp your game plan around. Just use it when it's available to you.
That makes sense.
So recursion. these both have recursion. This has really strong recursion. This has recursion that is really nice when you need to like action compress recursion a little bit, like move a little and recur.
Right.
What are we recurring? I think I have been a little bad about this. I think it's good to not recur stuff right at the start of the game. It's tempting because like this is just a good boost. You can get your good card back and have delta.
Right.
But I think it's probably a little better to hold on to later if you can. Just because you'll have more options for it to recur. You are able to represent the EX of this more easily. You can recur the second copy of a card instead of the first one. Like there's lots of little margin movements, but don't feel bad about using this really early just because it's value. It gets you a card back that you want.
Right.
What do we actually want to recur? We're recurring both the attacks and the boosts. Recurring attacks is valuable, but it does make them telegraphed. Recurring the boosts is very good. Recur a good boost if you want to. If you don't have something better to recur, these two are both very safe. This one is just a very reliable card. You can have the boost to bail you out of a lose condition. This is a very reliable card. You can have the boost if you get into an advantage position.
Right.
If you need a specific card, absolutely recur that specific card. This card gets you a good boost. It gets you your payoff. You can threaten it again. This card gets you huge mostly, though the ignore armor is nice to have if you have run out of copies of it. Yeah. Other than that, this gets you movement back. Again, we've seen most of the kit. There's very limited movement. There's like this movement, and then normals.
Right.
So if you need movement, this can fast movement in the future. A lot of caveats there.
Right.
Fast
Sure.
movement next turn. This will get you it.
There's a reason that you talked about these 4 cards before you talked about this one, but almost everything could be useful because of how Goldlewis works, but you're triaging
Yeah, like
it.
these are like very, very, very safe value.
Right.
These are like a little more niche, but again, super useful.
Right.
Then probably would not recur this very often, but certainly could. This one I might recur if I want to keep the threat of a range 1 mid-speed live and I'm out of it.
Sure.
That would be a really good reason to recur this. I would probably just never recur this, realistically. If I'm against an opponent that I really need to keep in the corner and I'm getting lots of value out of boosting this over and over again,
right,
that would be a situation. I just haven't really felt... I feel like if you boost this twice and you keep them in the corner and you hit them both times, you probably are ahead enough you don't need to do it a third time.
Yeah, they could get out of the corner and they can limp away with their 14 less life than when they got in the corner with.
Yep. And then this one probably goes in like this category of like, yeah, this is just a good card to have. You'll find a use for it.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Pretty flexible. You can always recur EXs. Like I said, there aren't too many EXs that are game changers for you, but it's nice to have a little more delta.
Right.
+1 power, +1 armor, plus another power and armor and speed and guard. Like stats add up. The more stats you put on something, the better it generally gets.
Sure.
Yeah. You would love to be able to recur normals because then you could recur badass and dash and area shift, but you can't.
Yeah, so. and continue to shore up the weaknesses in your defenses and in your game plan that you can't do with your specials.
Yep. Yeah. We talked about what to EX. You do also draw normals when you draw cards, and normal EXs are strong.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like EX dive, EX slash, EX
sweep. Yep.
But like these are cards that you need for other reasons as well. Using the EXs will matter.
Right. That makes sense.
So yeah.
So that's the kit then. Kind of, we have talked about more cards in this episode than we have in any previous XS Exceed episode.
Did I actually explicitly say that Goldlewis has like the most unique cards of any character in the game? Because I probably should if I haven't yet. Yeah. You have more unique cards than anyone else. People have to pay attention to that.
Right.
When you run out of options, you still have like 10 cards left I have to think about.
And they all have the same name for added mental load on your
confusion value
on your opponent. Yeah, I'm gonna hit you with Behemoth Typhoon, and you're gonna have to guess which one it is. So I think that you might be getting to this in a second as we move into discussing like the shape of his like game plan now that we've talked about all these things. But one thing that I'm noticing is I've got my first 2 gauge ready to go on exceed mode. That's my first target. After that, my ultras are not the highest priority thing in the world. I'd probably rather be boosting them. My cancels are for setting up, um, flexible situations where I can pay out with some strong cards, but I don't really seem like I have dedicated payout options short of um, Behemoth Typhoon Hurl. So what am I using my gauge for? Is it just canceling?
A lot of the time, yes, because canceling is how you survive neutral as a season 7 character.
Right.
You are not one of the season 7 characters, like, I don't know, maybe Kai is a good example.
Sure, yeah.
Kai has a lot of boosts that makes your attacks more reliable. You have range, you have economy, well, more that. Speed and guard, speed, key charge.
Right.
You
For
have
more
lots of ways
canceling.
to get gauge and spend gauge to make your attacks hit.
Right.
As Goldlewis, you have badass, you have scramble if you're willing to take the risk on it, you have kiss of death, but your
And
boosts are a lot slower by and
yeah.
large. You
And maybe guts, right, in certain situations.
Yep, maybe guts. Yep. So what cancels do for you is they let you kind of get around this weakness you have of you are weak on defense at the exact same ranges you want to be doing offense.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
You want to be at range 2 and throwing out some terrifying mix-up, but if you're at range 2 on their turn, they cross out, now you're at range like 4 or 5, you don't have very much to do, you have to get back in, you go back in, and then they like spike you or something. It's
Right.
not great. Cancels let you like dash and area shift, we're going to keep talking about these two.
Yep.
Change the board state really fast.
And threaten
Skyfish,
threaten
huge.
some scary mix up immediately. So and the power on these cards and the danger of these mix up options mean that you don't really need like a dedicated payout option to win the game. You're not looking for like a Metsu Hadoken, Metsu Shoryuken situation. You're going to be winning the game by hitting them with a huge briefcase over and over again until they die.
Pretty much. Yep.
Okay.
You can trade pretty well. You have like this smash is 6 delta when you strike with it.
Right.
Both sides of this card are good payouts because Swift now strike is really scary as well as the 6 power.
Right.
You can advantage chain a little bit if you get into like a position where you have this like multiple copies of this in your hand or assault or whatever. You have ways to turn force engage into damage.
Into damage, sure.
And your alters don't really help with that until you get to 4 gauge and EX down with the system.
Right. So I mean it fits back into the toolbox thing again. Like you aren't looking for a specific option, you're looking for options. And your opponent's
Yep.
going to run out of those options, answers those options before you are. You might not have the exact one you need, so you're going to have to change the situation pretty rapidly in order to take advantage of those holes. And then you hit them with a huge briefcase until they die.
Pretty much.
Okay.
That's kind of the Goldlewis fantasy, right? In Strive, Goldlewis, whenever he hits you with any of these Behemoth Typhoons, you are hit stun for like a million years, or
Right,
block
yeah.
stun for like a million years.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's going on with this draw 2 and all these economic value effects on your card. Getting
Right.
hit by Goldlewis really sucks.
Right.
So if you can hit them, if you can exceed and start landing specials, you're getting a lot more output out of your cards than they are at that point.
That makes sense.
So yeah, let's talk about the sort of the flow of the game, your game plan. Your early game, right at the start of the game, this card keeps you in the game, but otherwise this is like a really weak board state for you.
Right.
You need to get in, but getting in will cost you probably just force out of hand because you don't have great ways to do it. You can defend with this. If you attack with this, that's okay. That'll probably be reasonable because you hit them, you push them a little back, but they could just cross out or something.
Right.
It's not unbeatable by any means. And you have no cancels, so you have to kind of lumber around with your like, okay, I'm going to get 1 range and pass. I'm going to get 2 power and pass. I'm going to get 6 guard and pass.
Right.
Like, you have to do things quite slowly. And on one hand, don't feel obligated to go faster if going slowly is working. Like, you can afford to play pretty slow because of the deck pressure and everything. And the fact that, like, if the game gets to low deck sizes and you start trading, you find a gap in their defense, you will win pretty quickly from there.
Right.
With your high power values, etc. But if your opponent is forcing you to like react and like do things fast, it's hard without gauge or actually a lot of economy. Either you can't draw that many cards until you're exceeded.
Until you're exceeded, right? So I will be trying to get to my exceed mode, and they will be making me. Can you
Spend
imagine such a
gauge.
thing? Play neutral,
Yes, exactly.
right?
And you can play neutral kind of. You can play it okay, right? You again, season 7 boosts. You need gauge to do really threatening things, but you have Swift, even if I don't use it as just neutral Swift very often.
Right.
You have Swift Now Strike. You have these guard options. You have range. You can play kind of, and you can keep holding this up as a threat. Like, okay, if you really want to dive into me, you can. I'll take 2 damage. It'll be my turn at range 1, and now I can
And
start getting my own engine going.
right.
But it's still, yeah, it's a weak time for you. So you need to. What you really want is to get your first gauge, and then your opponent has to play around your cancels. You'd still like to not actually use the cancels, but because you'd like to get your second and third gauge. But your first gauge makes you a lot more threatening.
Right.
Then you want to exceed as early as possible, but you want to get full value out of the draw. And it's nice to exceed as early as possible, but like if you don't have an immediate plan to land specials afterwards, it's not getting you anything in the short term.
Right. Might as well build up a little bit more gauge if you've got a handful of normals or something. You will
Yep.
have the opportunity to draw those cards again, or rather, you will go to a lower hand size so you have room to draw those cards and more gauge to cancel with to start your big offense now that you've exceeded.
Yep.
Okay.
And also think about what cards you're using before you exceed. Like if you spend all your specials before you exceed, and then you exceed and have a handful of normals, you're sad, like you were saying.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, and your opponent will probably expect this to some extent. Like your Goldlewis, you'd want to land specials after you exceed, but your specials are already kind of a pretty good mix-up in a lot of ranges. So, just because they expect a special doesn't mean they know what to do to get out of being hit by it automatically.
Sure.
Um, yeah, canceling very high value because you have the power values, you have the economic value on hitting, but you need real ways to make yourself hit, which cancels give you. But yeah, you need to get that gauge. So play kind of slowly, play carefully if you have to. Don't waste gauge, but do use gauge if it's better to spend gauge and not exceed and win than not spend gauge and not exceed and lose and then
And
not get any
lose.
gauge.
Right, because they wouldn't let you play, if that makes sense.
So then once you've exceeded, now your specials all become kind of amazing. And you get to spend force more freely on stuff like this. Like you can use this before exceeding. You might want to, especially if it gets you your second gauge to exceed and reload.
Right.
Sorry, the boost on this.
Right,
But
yeah.
if you boost this like right at the start of the game, that's free force and the card you're striking with that you're not going to see again for a while.
Right, and you got one gauge you can't exceed yet. You still got to get your second one. However you got in, you better have another way to confirm that second gauge quickly to exceed.
Yep. So
Right.
exceeding the fact that you can expect to get more force when you exceed lets you be more free with the force that you spend.
Sure.
Yeah. So and then once you're exceeded and you like your mid speeds become insane. These are incredible when they say draw 2.
Right.
This is still just like this is a reliable slow. It's going to trade with everything, but it also draws 4 cards when it trades with something.
Right.
So this is just take another turn, but see 2 new cards and have your opponent use up an option. Once you're exceeded, your specials are very valuable. So that's cool. And then once you've exceeded and you've landed a few hits, that's your win condition because now you have gauge, you have exceeded. This might be coming back online just like the 2 gauge version of this, which helps your defense.
Right.
You can recur whatever you want because your discard's getting relatively full. You're drawing lots of cards every turn. You can cancel and strike, hit them, draw more cards, have more gauge, cancel and strike. Yeah. That's where you want to be.
And now it's not a card that you're paying out with. It's a game state. When you've gotten to the point where you have enough options flowing in that you are not losing gauge, you're converting gauge. It's an engine. You're converting gauge directly into damage, just not through an ultra where you're spending it. It's just I'm spending a little bit, I'm getting a little bit, and it's consistently hurting them more than they're hurting you.
Yep. So that's the win condition. Let's talk about the lose condition really fast.
Sure.
Uh, you'd think with all these cards in card draw, Goldlewis is pretty safe against running out of options. That's true if you play carefully. If you just like throw away options, you kiss of death, you're not exceeded yet, or you are exceeded and you don't have that many cards in hand. You kiss of death, you throw out some mid speed or something,
And you
and then you
whiff.
miss,
Yeah.
and now you have like 2 cards in hand. It's really hard to dig yourself back out of that.
Right.
Because this is your best card draw tool. It is very strong. You need to use this like before you're out of cards. If you use
Right.
this when you're out of cards, it's too late. You can't draw.
You might as well prep at that point.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you aren't winning strikes because you're out of cards and you can't make any threatening strikes, you're not getting value out of this. You have to prep.
Right.
They can strike into you. Your defenses are bad. Your wild swings are terrible because you can wild swing like this.
And none of your if you initiated things happen, so none of these cards are being used very
Yeah,
well at that point. Yeah.
like these are terrible wild swings. This is a terrible wild swing. This is an okay wild swing, just sits on curve, but it's
Right.
not exciting.
It's not the best it could be or anything.
Yep.
So part of this engine is you need to hit in the first place. And if you're not hitting, you're not getting your gauge, you're not being able to convert that gauge into more ways to hit.
Yep.
You're
So
also not
that's your
getting
lose
you're not
condition.
getting force out of it too, and you can't no ammunition at that point. Okay.
Yep. Um, your opponent does need to capitalize on it because again, you have the deck pressure. If they are willing to just take it slow when you're out of cards, that's great for you because you can just draw back up and now you're back in the game.
Right.
But if your opponent like does things, they boost, they strike, they get further ahead while you're out of cards, you're really sad.
Right.
So don't overcommit. You can afford to play slow. Don't play too slow because your defenses are bad. But you don't have to play too fast either because you can cover your defenses with boosts. You can stay at safe ranges on their turn and go to good ranges on your turn. That's the kind of flow of the Goldlewis game is. You are still this big, lumbering, heavy guy. Just when you are doing pressure, your pressure is really tough to deal with.
Right. So are you taking the move action kind of more often than most characters because you are sort of like
Yes.
waiting for your turn? Okay.
Yes, you take the move action. You do have to be careful because again, the ranges you're good at offense are like 3 and 2, and to a lesser extent 1.
Right.
And the ranges you're bad at defense are like 3 and 2. You're pretty good at defense at 1 because you have this threat.
Yeah, and you have
Like,
your normals that are good at defense at 1. But yeah, your point is well made that the places you want to be, if you take the move action, now you're there and they're striking into you where you're bad.
yeah. So
Okay.
take the move action with a plan. Have like an EX. Have be willing to defend or something that filters out your worst cases.
Right.
Something.
Right.
But yeah,
Uh,
move action is strong because you have a lot of force. You aren't. Your cards are good for getting payouts. They're not great for neutral. So if moving someplace for like 2 force gets you a lot of value in neutral, go for it.
right.
And you do have, if you can win neutral, you have plenty of cards. So spending cards to win neutral is good.
Oh, that makes
Spending
sense.
cards to take risks and not win neutral is less good.
That makes a lot of sense. You spend cards to get to the point where you get more cards. You don't spend
Yep.
okay. Yeah. You don't spend cards as a payout before you can afford the payout.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So this flows pretty nicely since we just talked about win condition, lose conditions into counterplay, which I know you'll want to ask about, and counterplay after
Yep.
that.
Absolutely.
So counterplay, understand this flow of this Goldlewis game that we just described. You're weak at the start. You are good at range 4, so you probably can't strike into Goldlewis that easily with slam up. But if you just start establishing your own game, Goldlewis has to respond to that, and it's not trivial for him,
Right.
especially before he gets his very first piece of gauge.
Right. The stuff that you were describing at the beginning of a Goldlewis game, almost every character that I've talked about with other experts, they have had scarier things that they can do from like turn 1 than Goldlewis does. Goldlewis seems
Yep.
like he really needs a little bit of time to get going.
Yep. Don't lose to this. This is like if you attack turn 1, Goldlewis will like not almost definitely, but quite likely defend with this.
Right.
And if you don't get too much value into it, that might be a lose for you. Because like you dive in and you deal 2 damage, that's great. Now Goldlewis area shifts you into the corner. Goldlewis has his first gauge. You're like this. You're miserable.
Yeah, that's a really
So
bad situation.
yeah. So this is what you need to figure out how to be at the start of the game. Is what are you going to do to like start doing your game plan without Behemoth Typhoon Slam messing you up?
Right.
But if you can do that, you've kind of gotten past the immediate problem. Now Goldlewis has to rely on normals to defend, call mix-ups, etc.
Right.
Play kind of slow neutral. Then once he has Gauge, he's like a normal character at that point. He's got options. He can do cancels. His cards are reasonable. But he still has the weaknesses we talked about. Like, he's weak on defense. He's weak to grasp at most board states. And if you like keep your neutral tempo high, he has to do the same, and he might have to cancel and stuff to stay in the game.
Right.
So make him spend resources. That said, don't get into a state where it's like, if you are doing that, you're spending all your resources. Goldlewis is spending most of his resources.
He has more
and
than
then,
you.
Yeah, he might have more than you, or even if he doesn't have more than you, but he's on front side, and you like end your turn. I don't know. What's a good example? Um, hmm. I don't know. You go for like some tricky spike right here or something, and he plays slam, pulls you in, gets his second Gauge, exceeds. Now he's drawn 3 cards.
He suddenly has way more resources because you've been spending yours.
And now, if you start getting hit by his cards, like, that's game over probably.
Right.
Because he'll get so much advantage out of that.
Right.
So it's a balancing act, right? Don't go too all in if he might be able to turn the corner and start doing his scary things, but you also need to stop him from getting to his scary things really easily.
Right. And in 2 Gauge is like, obviously it's really more than 2 Gauge because he's going to be canceling to play neutral if you make him. But like, you should plan for a good Goldlewis player to at some point exceed.
Yep. And that's the next thing about the understanding the flow of the game. As Goldlewis, it's really tempting to exceed right away. And often I will, just because I think I can handle the downsides.
Right.
But if you've exceeded, exceeding is also a reload. It's one of the few reloads that doesn't require cards in hand to do. You can also like boost this or CC. But if you exceed and you don't have, and you manage to like waste his next couple of attacks, make him overinvest because he's expecting to get force back, he can go back. He's back in this weak state where he has no Gauge and
kind of no character ability until he can actually land a hit.
Yeah.
Right.
So understand that that's a weakness of his, is this moment right when he's exceeded. If he hasn't been planning ahead for it, you are still possibly advantaged.
Right.
And then once he's exceeded and he's got Gauge, he's like at his maximum strength, and hopefully you are at that point as well, and you can kind of go toe to toe with it. But that is what he wants to do.
You want to have
you're just playing exceed at that point.
You want to have set up the conditions where you can beat him before he got to that point.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's the flow of the game. That's like the points where he's weak. He just does have the same weaknesses we've been talking about. He's weak on defense. He's weak to grasp.
Yep.
If you see like focus number 1 goes down and you have a card that beats everything but focus number 2, make him have it.
Oh, sure, because he probably won't. He's less likely than any other character in the game to have that specific card.
Yep. And then this is getting kind of into more general exceed stuff, but like understand the risk reward of what you're winning and losing to. Like a lot of the joke about like, oh, I just lose to spike, I take free damage. Sure.
Right.
You can lose to Goldlewis spike. At this range, lose to spike. At this range, don't lose to drop. I mean, like, sometimes it's a mix-up, right? You have to be willing to lose to drop.
Right.
But when you lose to drop, it'll really hurt because he's drawn
bad.
2 cards and you've discarded 2 cards as well.
Right.
So play to filter what you can't afford to lose to. Like, and sometimes that means you can afford to lose to drop. Other times it means you can't. But yeah, just kind of general exceed at that point. Sure. Don't lose to the things that you can't afford to lose to.
And don't be in a position where your only option is to lose to that thing.
Yep.
Right.
Don't let him strike into you at his good ranges often. 2 and 3. This card is strong. Everyone kind of agrees this card is strong to varying degrees. I do think. Oh, did I ever talk about why is this position negative?
Oh yeah, you were going to say something about how it seems position negative, but it might not be.
Yeah, okay. So I'll finish the don't let, like, this is a really scary card at range 3. If you just stand at range 3 and pass turn to him and you don't have a boost up, okay, Goldlewis smashes this card, he hits you for 5, you're here.
Right.
So don't let Goldlewis strike into you at ranges where he's advantaged as often as you can avoid it. But yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that's about it for the counterplay, so let's go back to the positioning.
Sure.
Goldlewis wants to be at position 2 and 3 on his turn. Those are good ranges for him to attack at. All of his cards hit at range 2 to varying values. A lot of them are a little weaker at range 2 than other more ideal ranges, like this one, this one, this one.
They at least still hit, but
they all still hit, but
they got
they're
better
better
use
at other
cases
ranges.
somewhere else. Yeah,
These ones are just at their best at range 2 is like these 3, and this one's pretty equivalent between range 1 and 2.
right.
So range 2 is a good range. Range 3 is a good range because he can defend with this, he can attack with this, or not this, where did it go? He can attack with Rise, he can defend with Slam. This is a great range for him to be at, just range 3 on his own turn without you having anything to change the math. So that's the positions that Goldlewis sounds like he's good in, range 2 and 3. And range 1, he's got a range 1, a very scary range 1 spike, which makes him decent at a range 1 mix-up as well.
Right.
So you'd think Goldlewis would need to run in and attack you at range 2 and 3, and to some extent, yes, that's what he'd like to do if you let him. But because he has all these cards, it's a 36 card deck, lots of different options that kind of cover all the points of the slow mid-speed curve.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to. He gets to play slower if he wants to. And that's, I think, one of the main points you can play Goldlewis differently is like how slow you choose to go. I think if you are having a good game, you can absolutely just hit them a bunch and win.
And just run them over, right?
Probably more true of Goldlewis than most characters because he gets to draw when he hits you. But I think every character having a good enough game can kind of do that a lot of the time. The way I like to play, you're going slow, but you are going slow with the intention that you are finding your opportunity to go in and attack.
Right.
But you can also just say, if you want to play slower Goldlewis, you can say, I have the deck pressure, I have options, I have good boosts, I can pass turn for value, I can recur good cards in the matchup. I can just say, I'm going to hit you with Rise and push you out to range 5, and that's fine. Right. We're at range 5. Unless you have like a good range 5 option, you probably also have to come back in if you want to win the game.
And unless you have action compression and you're spending a resource to do it, I'm spending my turn. You're spending your turn doing this. The thing that you started this section of the lecture saying is that Goldlewis wants to be at range 2 to 3 on his turn. If I push them to here and they spend their time walking back in, now it's range 2 to 3 on my turn.
Yep.
Okay.
So you can definitely, and that goes back to, I was talking about this, you can just play this as a boost without canceling it. Like you have reasonable options in neutral. Again, you don't have like super reliable boosts to make your attacks always hit, but your boosts are fine. You have Badass, you have Guts, you have Faultless, you have stuff like that.
Right.
You can play kind of slow. You can make the opponent take the initiative. It's always a bit funky though because his defense is bad without boosts. Like you can't just say, You're not. I mean, it's a balancing act.
The character we have on the board is sort of the exemplar of this style of play. Like you cannot be Ryu. You cannot stand at range 2, say, "Okay, hit me. I have Shoryuken. You know I have Shoryuken." And then on Ryu's turn, he's like, "Fierce, defensive, swift."
Yeah, you can't do that.
Right.
But you can stand at range like 4 and say, "Okay, I have Slam. What are you going to do? I'll start just boosting for value."
Right.
You can stand at range 5 or 6 and say, "Okay, I have more max hand size than you, and I can probably turn my cards into value faster than you can with cancels and Kiss of Death and stuff.
Sure.
So I'll just prep up and make you do something." That is something you can do. Yeah, and different characters are going to have to deal with that in their own ways. Like an actual zoner probably doesn't care too much about that. An actual zoner says, "Okay, we're at range 5, sure, prep Goldlewis." Notably, all those Testament specials that you beat at range 4 with this,
they don't work at range 5.
All of the ones that hit you at range 5 do beat this.
Right.
So that's one way. Another way is, like, if you have action compression of your own, get in, start doing your pressure before giving him a chance to respond. You also, like, Exceeded's, like, pretty complicated in terms of, like, who at any given moment is the one who should be, like, taking it easy versus going in. There definitely are some characters that need to be more aggressive than others over the course of the entire game. But, like, if Goldlewis is out here with, like, a full hand and you have no hand, sure. I mean, you can just draw some cards. You're not in a rush to do something because he doesn't have any pressure of his own.
Right. He might be boosting for value, but at some point he has to come in too.
Yeah, I mean, unless he was going really extreme and wants to deck you out, but, like,
sure,
you have the time to get your options back and then deal with it if you need to.
If you need to, that makes sense.
Yep. So that's why all these cards that are a little position negative, which is these three, are kind of position negative, but kind of also tolerable position
Right.
negative. Like,
If you're playing kind of a mid-rangey speed-wise, like a mid-gear speed Goldlewis, and you hit with a lot of these cards, you might dip into being a slow-playing Goldlewis for a little bit because you can now. Or
yep,
you might dip into being sort of an overdrive Goldlewis because you can't afford to give the opponent the opportunity to have that range on you. So when you hit with these cards, sometimes for some matchups, you're like, I got to go in right now. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'll take it easy. I'll play a little bit slower because these cards have afforded me the option to.
yep. And I think in most matchups you can afford to go slower. Definitely, like against a zoner or something, you will need to get in. But a lot of people, most of the interesting gameplay I see happens at ranges 1 to 3.
Yeah,
That's true for most characters.
yeah,
So you can take it slow if you need to,
that makes sense.
which is good for counterplay because
Incredible segue.
thank you. Because as we talked about the lose condition, over committing and then running out of cards is really hard for you.
Mm,
It doesn't happen unless things are going badly, but when it does happen, things are going really badly. So take it slow. Don't overcommit. Commit enough, but if you think you're going to run out of cards soon, boost this, draw a new hand.
right,
If you think you're going to run out of cards soon, you can take some time to prep. It's fine. You can just change cards naturally, but like usually you'll have this. Usually you might as well do this instead.
right, right,
You can recur an option that buys you more time at the range you're at, and then take your time to get back up to ready to use all your cards for value.
right.
Don't play too fast. Um, and then other things we talked about in the counterplay. Don't exceed right away with no plan. If you have a plan, or if you think that like it's a trade-off, because the earlier you exceed, the more value you get out of it. But if exceeding loses you the game, you probably shouldn't have done it.
Yeah, that's a lot of negative value if you've lost the game because you've exceeded.
Yep. Um, Again, your defense isn't great, so hold on to good defensive options. Hold on to your slows, hold on to your slam, hold on to relevant EXs,
Right,
or don't end turns at ranges. Going back to the like negative thing, don't end turns at these ranges that you don't want to get attacked at. End turn at ranges that you're fine being attacked at.
right, right.
Um,
Or if you can at least represent the option that
yeah,
would
there's
scare
always
them.
some element of bluffing, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
that would scare them off from attacking you even if you don't have it. You might have it. You got a very large hand. But
Yep.
but sometimes you need it. Sometimes you need to really have it because they won't always respect your bluff.
And then versus people who have like a lot of ability to get an advantage or chain strikes together, don't use up options that you don't know when you'll be able to replace. Like if I don't know, Ryu has a lot fair advantage, but he doesn't feel like the best example. Like a Lychee or someone attacks into you and gets advantage, and you are wild swinging.
Right.
You better hope that you are wild swinging that particular strike, and you do have an answer to another strike, and you're not just like all in on the wild swing bailing you out, because it probably won't,
Sure,
and they'll
sure.
get a lot of damage before you have time to react. Um, yeah, and save your limited movement boosts to get the positions you need to get to when you need to. Um, don't like if you're going to be at the safe range, then like okay, but have a plan to get back in if you need to.
Know how to get back in even if that plan is uh spend a couple force, or even if it's not like the best plan, have a plan.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
And do watch out for reading. You will be vulnerable to it eventually if you are playing the slower style. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you can afford to lose to it depending on the state of the game, but just be aware that it does exist and you don't have it. So if they do have it, that's an advantage they have in a slower game.
Right.
So yeah, that's counterplay and counterplay. Unless you have any questions about anything, we can go on to some more characters.
Yeah, no,
But
this has been wonderful. Please, let's go on to that. Other characters who might scratch the Goldlewis itch, or if you are a fan of other characters, and you are looking at Goldlewis and you're like, maybe his hair is pretty cool, his sunglasses are pretty cool, maybe I'll give him a try. Uh, who kind of plays like him? I know that you have like a manifesto about Linne, and I really want to hear it. I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'm really looking forward to this part of the lesson.
All right, that one I'm putting off a little because I'm going from like most obvious to me to one that I'm gonna have to justify a
All
little
right,
more.
I'll have to wait a little bit longer then.
Yeah. So I think there's an archetype of character that's like this half grappler. They're not really a grappler, but they have high red numbers, they push the enemies into the corner often, they want to exhaust the enemy's options, and then they lay on these really high value, high power moves. So like
Right,
a lot of red Shotos do this. Not Ken. Ken is more of a rushdown, but like Soul or Ragna.
Ragna, sure.
Polar Knight, probably like a Waltz. Well, Waltz seems like more of a real grappler, but
Yeah,
people who have this slow but really threatening once they get in game plan.
right. It's slow until the game is over in 2 turns.
Yeah, exactly. That's a
Yeah,
great description.
yeah,
Big hand characters. This is not the only big hand character. They all play pretty differently. Seijin has absolutely giant hand size, but Seijin does different things with it because transforms and her cards. Um, she has like these really threatening like 7 power 4 speed versus 4 speed 4 power 7 speed mix-ups and stuff like
right,
that.
right.
Um, but she does have the same kind of bulky, slow moving, limited range. And she does not have the deck pressure, I think, most of the time, is my understanding, is a difference. But yeah, if you like having lots of cards in hand, Seijin exists. You can play Exceed Side Guile, draw a
Yep.
bunch of cards. Exceed Side Guile, I feel like I have mostly played him not exceeding, but my impression is Exceed Side Guile tends to be a lot more aggressive than
Oh yeah,
Goldlewis.
oh yeah. He has to keep striking because he can't afford not to, or he's going to discard 20 cards.
Yep. And I think because of like the shades, he can also get more value out of EXs because EXs keep your shades alive even if you get hit.
Right,
Type of thing.
because of the little bit of bonus guard plus the extra guard from the EX. Yeah,
So he actually does like mashing EXs a fair bit,
right,
whereas I think Goldlewis less. But they both. This is kind of similar to the Goldlewis endgame where everything's going right. If you get to the Guile endgame, everything's going right. You're
right,
both just dropping lots of cards and doing lots of damage.
right, right.
So if you like playing lots of cards in hand, that's another similarity. Toolbox characters, which I feel like pretty hard pressed to say who else in this game is a toolbox character, so I'm also just going to broaden that out to characters who have lots of forced expenditure decisions. Because, like, I guess the character people think of sometimes as being a toolbox character is Nine because she has that recursion stuff going on.
Right,
I think
she can just.
Goldlewis doesn't really work the same way as her in a lot of ways, though.
But the feeling of like the you always have an answer, but the challenge of finding it or getting it into the location it needs to be is sort of a similar challenge to what Goldlewis is facing, just with the larger deck size.
Yep. Yeah, but she has a lot like faster recursion, right? Like Goldlewis, if you want to recur, you are passing turn to do it.
Right, right,
And a lot of it's about like keeping the right cards in your hand. Whereas Nine's like basically the exact opposite. You want the card not in your hand so you can get it when you need it.
right.
You want it in the seal zone. So she's the toolbox character, but she feels pretty different to me. So that's why I broadened this category out to include just characters who make force decisions. Everyone does that to some extent, but you've got like the Ram, the Fight, the Remless, the characters who on their ability have it printed like spend force for effect.
Right.
Those characters are all about spending the right cards at the right times. And then like season 5 in general. Season 5 tends to be a lot about resource decisions.
Resources, yeah. Even Hazama to an extent, like, would probably be a good
Oh
exemplar
yeah,
of
Zama
that.
is absolutely, yep. Yeah, like the game flow is different, but he makes a lot of resource decisions a lot because
Right.
he's spending force. He has both sides of what I was talking about. He has printed on his ability spend force to do something,
Right.
and he's season 5
And
character.
his season 5 stuff, right? Yeah. So if you like that kind of thing for Goldlewis, or if you like Hazama, Goldlewis might be a choice for you.
Yep. And then in the Linnae guide, I said Goldlewis is the Linnae of season 7, and I thought I wouldn't have to justify it more than I did in that guide because I didn't think I was doing
You
this
didn't
guide
think
at the
you were
time.
doing Goldlewis. No, I've trapped you. Now you have to know.
Yes.
So I assume if you shocked up Linnae's hair and gave her the glasses and a fake beard, indistinguishable from
Absolutely.
Goldlewis.
And the coffin, like they even have
Yep.
like sort of like see the sword's behind her back, the coffin's behind his back.
Okay.
It's the exact same.
I assume that you have more than this, Rose.
I do, okay.
Okay, all right.
So my argument is that both these characters, I had a whole section about this in my written Linnae guide, but like as Linné, you can convert a lot of resources into power really quickly. Like
Right.
you have the advantage chains, you have the boost from your gauge and strike, you have the altars that you build up to with an advantage chain and then play.
Mhm.
And then you also get economic value out of continuing to land these strikes because you use up the opponent's good defensive options and
And and
you.
and they're going to gauge so that you can keep on doing it.
Yep.
Right.
In a really like simple way, advantage is similar to draw two because you can draw two
You
if you have to.
you could prep, right?
But obviously, you'd rather not prep. You'd rather do something better than prep if you can. But Goldlewis would also rather not prep because you drew two with the hit, so now you can do something better than prep.
So
So
okay, so Goldlewis Goldlewis works like Linné if Linné's advantage the minimum value of advantage is draw two cards. Goldlewis gets that anyway and then gets to take another action because that wasn't his action. He just
yeah,
hit
when
you
he
and
can
got
gain
that.
advantage for real. Yep.
Right. Okay.
So you are really rewarded for continuing to land strikes. As I was kind of saying in the counterplay, dodging Goldlewis makes him really sad. Dodging Linné makes her really sad.
Right. You tend to
Um,
invest.
you have
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. You don't tend to invest. It's that if you don't keep hitting, you can't maintain your engine.
Yep. Yeah, because you do tend to invest somewhat with like Kiss of Death and cancels and stuff.
Right.
So yeah. I will grudgingly admit that this card is better than Sky Things. They're similar. I'm going to say it. They're similar. Uh, where's my Sky Things? My beloved. Look at those stat lines. They're speed 4. They got the free armor that you lose afterwards. These are good defensive cards. I will go to the grave saying that. But this one's better. I will freely admit that.
Okay.
Um, you have pretty limited like above curve as Goldlewis. Like so a lot of it comes down to like you're doing pressure in a similar way when you are doing pressure. You both like range 2. You have lots of these incidental +1 power boosts, the way that Linné gets +1 power from her gauge. I think it's there. I really do. This is my like chalkboard with the pins and lines.
The Pepe Silvia
Yeah, exactly.
conspiracy theory. I get you. Well, I mean,
So
but also hold on. That's the kind like uh Goldlewis is like a cryptid hunter. That's the exact kind of conspiracy theory thing that he would be really into.
well,
So,
no. He doesn't believe in the thing in his suitcase. He's just a
oh,
no nonsense government man, and he just
true,
happens to have an alien in his suitcase that he doesn't believe in. I
true.
think
So he would find this analogy completely unconvincing.
probably, but it's real. Okay, I swear.
I believe you,
Uh,
Rose.
and this is why I actually wrote this like in my outline. I'm like, I'll put a final thought section so I don't end on this because I do feel like this is a little bit
This is out too
not
out there,
represented. Yeah, this is a little too out there to be what I end the lesson on.
right?
So I do think it's real, but there's a reason I talked about like the force expenditure characters and half grapplers first. I think those are much more obvious comparisons.
Sure, sure.
So yeah, final thoughts. I think this guy is really cool. I think you get to make a lot of interesting decisions. I think something that might turn people away is that like in easy games you don't necessarily see the interesting decisions you're making because you just run over the opponent.
Okay.
But when you are playing a tight game, it's a lot of thought, which is cool. Choosing which options to use is really deep. It's like the deepest part of this game, and if you get better at it, it makes you better at the whole game. And when Season 7 was new, I think in the period between when testing was finished, but shortly into after public release, which was quite a while, Goldlewis was my favorite character in this entire game. And I don't like him any less. I just realized I like Rachel even more.
Right.
But yeah,
You found a new replacement, but he's still up there.
yep.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I am, let's say, medium convinced about the Linné Goldlewis comparison.
Oh no, don't bring it back so that now I have to have even more final thoughts.
I got a segue. Don't worry. I'm a professional. I get paid the
All
big
right, all
bucks for
right.
this. I'm medium convinced by that. I am 100% convinced that Goldlewis is awesome. I can't wait to try him. The stuff that you've described, the decision making that you've described, is the kind of thing that I think that everybody should play Exceed for. So I'm really really excited to give some of this stuff a go.
Awesome. Yeah, that is basically the best I can hope for out of these guys is if I convince you to actually want to try the character.
Absolutely. As always, I mean, your expertise is appreciated, your time is obviously appreciated, but your advocacy for characters, everybody that I've talked to I've come away being like, I didn't think anything about this character. Now I think they're awesome. Or, I really wanted to try them. Now I have a good reason to try them. It's
Mm.
consistent. It turns out Exceed's a hard game. If you spend the time to become an expert at it, it's probably because you like the character, and that comes through. So, uh, hopefully, people watching this, if they didn't already like Goldlewis for his awesome hair and beard and glasses and everything else about him, now you like him because he seems like a really damn cool Exceed character. And Rose, thank you for your time and your ability to make people see that. And obviously, thank you for your expertise in leveling people up to make him play a little bit better. Uh,
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
of course, it always is. I always look forward to talking to you. And viewers at home, thank you so much for your time and your attention. I will see you for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Take care.